In 1995, a little-known incident very nearly triggered a nuclear war. For 8 minutes, the Russian military were put on high alert, and the Russian president contemplated launching a nuclear strike on the United States. The world could have ended that night, without anyone understanding what really happened. But strangely, the blame for this close call lies not with Russia or the United States. It was Norway. People often don't realize this, but Norway shares a border with Russia. Because of this, tensions between the two countries have always been delicate. In 1949, Norway became a founding member of NATO, meaning American missiles could potentially be housed here. As was the case when US missiles were placed in Turkey, the Soviets were not happy about such a threat from one of its neighbors. Still today, this remains an issue, with both sides of the border witnessing a military buildup. Things were not much different in the 1990s. Despite the collapse of the Soviet Union, many in the US government still saw Russia as a geopolitical rival. At first, Russia felt differently, hoping America and Russia could reshape the world together as friends. Clearly, this never happened, and before long both nations saw the other only with suspicion. It's debatable which side is responsible for this. Some people blame Russia, some people blame America. I blame the Japanese, and I think we all know why that is. What we know for certain is that this mutual distrust almost brought a nuclear apocalypse. On January 25, 1995, a team of scientists in Norway launched a rocket. The purpose of that rocket was entirely peaceful, to study a light phenomenon called the aurora borealis. Such a rocket launch was nothing unusual, but this time, the message informing Russia ahead of the launch somehow got lost. So when the rocket reached a certain altitude, the Russian military thought it was an American nuclear missile headed for Moscow. Russia's nuclear force were put on alert, and the president informed this might be it. In Russia, they have a nuclear briefcase, from which a nuclear strike can be initiated remotely. Developed in the 1980s, it goes everywhere the president goes, meaning at any time a nuclear attack can be launched. Now the briefcase was taken to President Yeltsin, and for the first time ever, activated for a real-life situation. His generals advised Yeltsin to order an attack, as an American missile was clearly on its way. For several minutes he carefully considered what to do. He had the authority and justification to launch a strike. But deep down he just didn't believe Russia was under attack. Sure, the US was no friend of Russia, but they had no reason to launch a random nuclear strike. And so for 8 long minutes he took no action, simply waiting for news. Luckily, good news is what followed. The rocket began to move away from Russian airspace, following its trajectory to northern Norway, and they realized the whole thing was a misunderstanding. About a week later, the incident was reported in the news, and the world learned how vulnerable she is. It remains the only time Russia's nuclear briefcase was activated, and while less well known, probably brought us closer to destruction than the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's difficult to overstate how close to nuclear war we came. Boris Yeltsin was a notorious alcoholic. He was always drunk, even when meeting other world leaders. The guy was a legend, but really not the man you want holding a nuclear briefcase. Yet by pure chance he was sober this night. That's a big part of this story, because if Yeltsin had been drunk during the Norwegian rocket incident, it might have ended very differently. So that brings us to the end of this video. If you wish to support my channel, consider leaving a like, comment, or even sharing to social media. All those things help a lot.